My name is Nadine Harwell. I'm 63 years old. Thursday afternoons are usually quiet in my kitchen. The kettle whistles once the radio hums low, and the marsh light slides through the blinds in soft stripes. That day, the air felt heavier, though I didn't know why until my son walked in. Evan didn't knock anymore. He just called out Mom and came straight to the table, already talking about work traffic, the usual things that fill the space before something worse. He poured himself coffee, the same mug I'd given him when he graduated, white ceramic, with blue lettering that said Savannah Technical College. He still used it every time he came over. That small habit used to comfort me. It didn't that day. He stirred in 2 sugars, sat down across from me, and said it as calmly as if he were announcing the weather. From now on, I'll have your pension sent directly to my account. It'll be easier. You won't have to deal with all the bills and stuff. I thought I'd misheard him. The refrigerator hummed behind me. The clock ticked. His words hung there flat and confident. Before I could form a reply, his wife Lydia walked in carrying a stack of papers. "We can take care of everything," she said, smiling without warmth. "You shouldn't be handling money at your age. It's stressful. Let Evan handle it. He's good with numbers." I looked from her to him. Evan leaned back, tapping his finger on the table, avoiding my eyes. That nervous habit tapping when he wanted something hadn't changed since he was a boy, begging for a new toy. Only now it wasn't a toy. It was control. My throat tightened, but I made my voice steady. "You think I can't manage my own pension?" He gave a small laugh. "Mom, it's not about that. We just want to make sure everything's handled properly. You don't have to worry." That word worry had followed me all my life. Through years of double shifts, of raising him alone after his father died, of counting coins before rent was due. I had earned the right to worry on my own terms. I set my hands flat on the table so he wouldn't see them tremble. "If you think it's best," I said softly. His face brightened, relieved. He stood, kissed my forehead quickly, the way someone signs a form. "Good. I'll set it up next week." When the door closed behind them, the house returned to silence. I stayed there for a long while, watching the coffee grow cold in his old mug. My fingers rested on the wood grain, tracing tiny ridges I hadn't noticed before. The air had shifted somehow. That night, I opened a notepad and wrote 1 sentence on a clean page Friday dinner, as usual. Then I circled it twice. The next morning, I woke before the sun. The air over the marsh was pale and still the kind of quiet that makes you notice every sound, drawers opening, the scrape of chair legs, the sigh of the old floorboards. I made a pot of coffee, sat down with a small pad, and began writing numbers. Not plans exactly, just what things might be worth if they were gone. By noon, I had called a man from a second-hand shop on Montgomery Street. He came with a small truck and careful hands. Together, we moved out the couch, the rug, the glass cabinet filled with old dinner plates I'd kept since my wedding. When the last box was gone, only a table and 1 chair remained. The room looked bare, almost holy. I didn't feel sad, only clear. The less I had, the less anyone could take. That Friday, I cooked as usual, roast chicken, mashed potatoes, the scent of rosemary filling the kitchen. Evan and Lydia arrived right on time. I heard their car door slam, their voices outside the key, turning in the lock. "Mom," Evan called, then silence. I waited at the table. Lydia's heels clicked across the floor, then stopped. I could almost feel her confusion before I heard her voice. "Where's everything?" Evan appeared in the doorway, his eyes wide, scanning the room, like a man who'd walked into the wrong house. "Mom, what happened? Did someone rob you?" I smiled and folded my napkin. "No, dear. I just thought if you're managing my money now, I should start saving." His mouth tightened. The color drained from his face. Lydia whispered something under her breath. Something about elder confusion. I stood, moved the single plate of chicken toward them, and said gently, "Dinner's ready." They didn't sit. The silence stretched until the ticking clock was the only sound. Evan muttered they'd come back another time and left without saying goodbye. When the door shut behind them, I exhaled slowly. The smell of rosemary lingered in the empty room, warm and steady, like victory dressed as peace. The day after that strange dinner, I walked through the empty living room and let the sunlight spill across the bare floor. It reminded me of another kind of emptiness, those years when Evan was small and I filled silence with work. Back then, mornings began at the public library on Bull Street. I shelved books, helped children find stories about pirates or dogs, then stayed late to tidy the reading tables before the doors closed. After a quick bus ride home, I would cook dinner, check Evan's homework, and kiss his forehead goodnight. Then when the city lights came on, I'd head out again. At 9 o'clock sharp, I pushed my cleaning cart down the marble hallways of the county courthouse. The smell of disinfectant mixed with the faint perfume of papers and ink. I'd hum under my breath to stay awake old hymns my mother used to sing while washing dishes. By the time I got home, Evan would already be asleep, his school clothes laid out for the next morning. Those years blurred together. Dawn, coffee bus rides, double shifts. I told myself I was building something solid for him, a foundation strong enough to hold both of us. When his acceptance letter came from a private college in Atlanta, I cried harder than I did at my own wedding. I took a loan, signed papers I barely understood, and sent him off with 2 suitcases and a kiss. He called less after that. Just quick updates, grades, new friends, the occasional thank you text. I told myself it was normal. Children grow mothers' weight. When he graduated, I was still paying off the loans. Then came the wedding. It was beautiful, at least from the back of the room where I sat. Lydia's parents hosted it at a vineyard outside the city, all white tents and champagne. My name wasn't on the program. I smiled through every photo, through every toast that mentioned how Evan had built himself from the ground up. When I got home that night, I hung the dress in my closet and went straight to work the next morning. Bills didn't pause for celebration. Now, standing in the quiet of my stripped-down house, I could see it all clearly. The long pattern of giving, the slow erosion of thanks. I had mistaken constant sacrifice for love, and in doing so had taught my son how easy it was to take. 2 mornings later, I walked to the bank on Abercorn Street. The humidity clung to my skin even that early, thick as worry. I had hardly slept the night before. Something inside me kept whispering that what Evan said wasn't just arrogance, it was preparation. The bank lobby smelled faintly of lemon polish and air conditioning. I almost turned around, afraid of looking foolish, but a young teller with kind eyes called out, "Ma'am, can I help you?" Her name tag read Carmen. I explained I wanted to check my account. Recent deposits, withdrawals, anything unusual. She smiled, patient. "Of course, Ms. Harwell. Do you want a full statement?" Minutes later, she handed me several pages. Rows of dates, numbers, and words lined up neatly like soldiers. At first, nothing stood out. Then halfway down the second page, one line caught my eye. Withdrawal, $1.200, Weston branch. I hadn't been to that branch. I hadn't withdrawn that money. My stomach tightened as I stared at the numbers. "Could you tell me when that was?" I asked quietly. Carmen clicked her keyboard. 3 months ago. "It was done in person with your card. My cards never left my wallet," I said. My voice shook a little, and she looked up, concern flickering in her eyes. "If you'd like, we can file a dispute," she offered. "It may take some time to investigate." I nodded, thanked her, and left with the papers trembling in my hand. Outside, the morning had turned hot. Cars rolled by in slow motion, and I walked home feeling as if the world around me had tilted slightly off its axis. At the kitchen table, I spread out the statements and stared at them until the ink blurred. That single transaction kept repeating in my head. I reached for the shoebox where I kept my old documents, tax papers, receipts, warranty slips. I hadn't opened it in years. Inside, I found a credit card bill I didn't recognize, different bank, different logo. The balance was over $2,000, the purchases listed at home improvement stores I'd never set foot in. I checked the address on the top corner and felt the air leave my lungs. It was Evan's address. I kept digging, my fingers moving faster now. Near the bottom of the box, folded between old insurance forms, was a utility bill in my name, electric service for a house I didn't live in. His house again. The papers lay scattered across the table, their corners curling in the humid air. It was all there, the proof I hadn't wanted, but somehow expected. Each line of printed ink carried a small betrayal, measured and dated. I sank into the lone chair, the one I'd kept after selling the others, and pressed my palm flat on the documents. For a moment, I couldn't move. The truth was as ordinary as paper and just as sharp. Outside, a storm was building over the marsh. The first low rumble of thunder rolled through the air, steady and distant, like something inevitable drawing closer. By the next morning, the storm had passed, leaving the streets of Savannah washed clean and glistening. I folded the papers into a manila envelope, tied it with string, and caught the first bus downtown. The ride was quiet, the kind where everyone keeps their thoughts to themselves. I sat near the window watching sunlight break through the moss-covered oaks. The office on Whitaker Street was smaller than I expected. No polished marble floors, just a faded carpet, and the faint smell of coffee. The sign on the glass door read, Marcus Levin, Attorney at Law, Elder Rights and Family Estates. He greeted me with a handshake firm enough to remind me I wasn't invisible. Marcus was maybe in his 50s, graying at the temples, with eyes that seemed to notice more than most people said aloud. "Tell me what brings you in," he said. I laid the envelope on his desk. "My son," I began, the words heavier than I meant them to be. "I think he's been using my accounts without my permission." He opened the envelope, pulled out the bank statements and bills, and read in silence. Every few pages he made a small mark with his pen, his brow tightening just slightly. When he finally looked up, his voice was calm, but certain. "Mrs. Harwell, this isn't family help. It's financial abuse." The word abuse hit like a door slamming. I sat back, stunned by how simple he made it sound. He kept talking, practical and clear. "You'll need to close these accounts, open new ones under your name only, and move your pension to a separate bank. I'll help you draft a formal statement in case this escalates. Keep copies of everything, every document, every transaction. Don't sign a single form he gives you." I nodded slowly, trying to take it all in. Shame rose for a moment. How had I let this happen? But Marcus's tone left no space for guilt, only action. He walked me through each step until I could see the path ahead like a line drawn in clean ink. Before I left, he handed me a business card. "You're not alone," he said. That evening, back in my kitchen, I placed the card beside the stack of papers and sat down in the single chair. The room was still bare, but it no longer felt hollow. My hands were shaking from exhaustion, yet for the first time in years they were shaking with purpose. It happened 3 days after my meeting with Marcus. The afternoon light was sharp, the kind that makes every shadow seem heavier. I had just finished sealing a letter to the pension office when the sound of tires crunching on gravel reached the porch. I didn't have to look to know who it was. Evan's voice carried through the screen door before his hand even touched the knob. "Mom, we need to talk right now." I wiped my hands on a towel, walked to the front hall, and opened the door halfway. Lydia stood behind him, arms folded, her face drawn tight. He was holding a manila folder. I recognized the way his jaw clenched. It was the same look he had as a boy when he'd been caught lying. "What's this about?" I asked, keeping my voice calm. He lifted the folder, waving it slightly. "It's just some updated forms. Tax stuff, power of attorney routine. Lydia said we should get your signature today, so your pension isn't delayed." I stayed where I was, the door still half closed between us. "You mean the pension you already tried to move?" Evan froze for a second, then forced a smile. "What are you talking about?" I took a deep breath and began listing it all: the withdrawal at the West Side branch, the credit card in my name, the utility bills for their house. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. Each fact fell between us like a stone hitting water. Lydia shifted uncomfortably. "You must be mistaken," she said quickly. "You're remembering wrong, I'm not," I said. "I have copies. I have legal counsel, and I've already filed disputes with the bank." Evan's color changed from pale to furious. He dropped the polite tone. "You think you can accuse me of theft? I've taken care of you. Who do you think pays for all your things?" "Everything I own," I said softly, "was paid for long before you were born." He stepped forward, trying to push the door, but I stayed firm, one hand against the frame. His voice cracked with anger. "You're my mother, you owe me." The sentence hung there raw and ugly. I looked at him the way I once did when he was a child, throwing a tantrum, tired, sad, and certain it had to stop. "No, Evan," I said quietly. "I already paid in full." For a long moment, no one spoke. The cicadas outside buzzed so loudly, it felt like the air itself was vibrating. Lydia tugged his sleeve, whispering for him to leave. He finally turned away, the folder still clutched in his hand. When their car disappeared down the street, I locked the door and leaned against it. My heart was pounding, but it wasn't fear anymore. It was release. The silence that followed didn't feel empty. It felt earned. Evan didn't come back after that day, but his voice found its way into my life again through the screen. One morning, Marcus called. "Don't be alarmed," he said. "Your son's been posting things online." I opened my laptop and saw the words. Some people never appreciate what their children do for them. My mother turned on me after everything I've done. Dozens of comments flooded in, friends offering sympathy, strangers calling him a good son. I read each one slowly, my pulse steady. Then I clicked the next tab, the court's digital filing system. Marcus had already submitted the documents, bank statements, fraudulent signatures, evidence neatly arranged and signed. Within a week, the case was public record. The story changed on its own. Screenshots of the filings spread faster than his accusations. The same people who had praised him now went silent. Others whispered that he'd stolen from his own mother. Lydia deleted her accounts first, then moved out of their apartment 2 months later. The court's decision came quietly, just a letter in the mail with the judge's signature. Evan was ordered to repay $18,000 plus damages. No trial, no headlines, just paper and consequence. I didn't frame the letter or show it to anyone. I folded it, once slipped it into the same drawer where I kept old birthday cards from when he still wrote "Love your boy." At night, when I sat by the window, the city hummed in the distance. Somewhere out there, people were talking about us. But I didn't need to correct the story anymore. The truth had already taken care of itself. Justice, I realized, didn't always shout. Sometimes it arrived like dusk, slow shore and impossible to stop. The cottage sat at the edge of Tybee Island, where the air smelled faintly of salt and sun-warmed pine. It wasn't much, 2 rooms, a porch, and a strip of sand that caught the first light of morning, but it felt like breathing again after years underwater. I unpacked slowly, 1 box at a time. In the small garden out back, I planted 3 rose cuttings I'd saved from the old house, the ones my husband had tended before he passed. The soil was loose and kind, and when the breeze moved through, I almost heard his voice in it. A week later, Marcus stopped by. He carried a paper bag that smelled of sugar and butter. "Peach tarts," he said, setting them on the table. "From the farmer's market. You look different, calmer." I laughed softly. "You told me once to protect my assets. Turns out peace is the most valuable one." He smiled, leaning on the porch railing as the waves whispered beyond the dunes. "You're the calmest client I've ever had." "It's easier now," I said. "Once you stop trying to fix what isn't broken me." He nodded, as if that answer belonged to both of us. When he left, the sun was sinking low, brushing the horizon in pink and gold. I sat by the window with a cup of tea, the roses just visible through the glass. For the first time in years, I didn't feel small. I simply felt whole. The mail arrived late that afternoon, the way it often did on the island, lazy, unhurried, carried by sea air. I sifted through the envelopes without much thought. A utility bill, a postcard from a neighbor traveling in Savannah, and one plain white envelope with handwriting I knew as well as my own. Evans. The letters of his name were still deliberate, still slightly tilted to the right. For a moment, my hand trembled. I could almost hear his voice rehearsing the words. Inside, "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to, I was under pressure." The same rhythms of regret that always arrived too late when the damage had already turned to memory. I carried the envelope to my desk, tracing the edge with my thumb. Then, without opening it, I placed it in the top drawer beside a bundle of old photographs and the folded court letter. Some stories didn't need revisiting. Some doors once closed stayed that way out of mercy, not anger. Outside, the tide had begun to rise, whispering against the rocks. I stepped onto the porch, lantern in hand, and struck a match. The flame caught easily, steady against the wind. For years, I'd left lights on for others, waiting for a son to visit, for footsteps to return, for the sound of keys in the lock. Now the light was only for me. I watched the horizon blur as dusk settled over the island and said softly, "I spent 60 years being someone's mother. Now I'm finally mine." The lantern glowed as the water climbed higher, the world wrapped in quiet silver. And for the first time, I didn't wait for anyone to come home. I already was. Outline, protagonist, Nadine Harwell, 63, retired librarian in Savannah, Georgia. Tone, realistic, intimate, emotionally restrained Southern storytelling. Focus, the shocking moment. Evan visits on a Thursday, casually announces he'll redirect her pension to his account so she won't have to worry. His wife nods with that polite cruelty only money can teach. Nadine sits still, feeling her pulse in her fingertips. She agrees softly, but watches him memorizing the tone, the ease of control. Emotional purpose. The wound opens quietly. The reader feels disbelief and tension. Hook-end question. When your own child speaks like a banker, not a son, what part of you finally breaks? Focus. Her first quiet test. She sells her living room furniture, keeps only a chair and table. When Evan and his wife come for dinner, they're stunned. Nadine smiles and says, "If you're managing my money, I thought I'd start saving." His face hardens. The wife mutters about elder confusion. Emotional purpose. First act of rebellion. Introduces the calm, strategic mother. Hook-end question. If silence can humiliate the selfish, is that cruelty or justice? Focus. Flashbacks to her sacrifices. Double shifts at the library and night cleaning jobs. Single motherhood, paying for Evan's private college, attending his wedding as a guest instead of family. Every scene reveals how quiet sacrifice built the entitlement, now devouring her peace. Emotional purpose builds empathy and history, explains the moral core of her endurance. Hook-end question. When love becomes habit, does it still count as love or survival? Focus, discovery, and realization. At the bank, a kind teller helps her print 6 months of transactions. She spots a $1 or $200 withdrawal she never made. Later, she finds a credit card she never opened and a utility bill in her name at her son's address. The betrayal becomes visible ink on paper. Emotional purpose. Suspense and validation. Fear turns to clarity. Hook-end question. What do you do when the proof of betrayal fits neatly in your own hands? Focus. Naming the crime. Nadine visits Marcus Levin, an elder law attorney. He reviews the papers and says bluntly, "This isn't family help, it's financial abuse." He guides her to close accounts, move her pension, and document everything. That night, she sits in her empty kitchen exhausted, but no longer afraid. Emotional purpose. Knowledge replaces shame. Power begins quietly. Hook-end question. Once you learn your rights, can you ever go back to being silent? Focus, emotional, and moral climax. Evan and his wife storm in, demanding she sign updated forms. She opens the door halfway, stands in the frame, never inviting them in. She lists the dates, the stolen card, the false bills. His denial collapses into rage. "You're my mother, you owe me," he shouts. Nadine replies, "I already paid in full." Emotional purpose. Release and catharsis. Voice of moral authority. Hook-end question. When the child you raised becomes your enemy, can truth still sound like love? Focus, exposure, and justice. He posts online about his toxic mother seeking sympathy. But once the lawsuit becomes public record, his lies unravel. The court orders repayment of $18,000 plus damages. Neighbors whisper. His wife leaves. Emotional purpose, justice lands softly, but deeply. Truth speaks without her needing to shout. Hook-end question. When the world finally sees the truth, why does silence feel louder than applause? Focus, renewal. She moves to a coastal cottage near Tybee Island, replants her late husband's rose cuttings. Marcus visits, brings local peach tarts, and says, "You're the calmest client I've ever had." Nadine smiles. It's easier once you stop trying to fix what isn't broken me. Emotional purpose. Emotional recovery. Peace after the storm. Hook-end question. When you stop carrying guilt, what do your hands finally have room to hold? Focus, closure, and legacy. A letter from Evan arrives full of apology phrases she can already predict. She places it in her desk drawer, unopened. At dusk, she lights her porch lantern and whispers, "I spent 60 years being someone's mother. Now I'm finally mine." The tide rises, and her peace is quiet, complete. Emotional purpose. Soft ending of emotional ownership and freedom. Final hook question. When forgiveness stops being owed, does it finally become real?